Hi, welcome everybody to our March workshop for the Watershed Journal. I'm Jess Weibel. I'm an executive director for the Watershed Journal, and I'm so excited. We actually have our presenters in-house today, and those of you who have seen the schedule and promotional materials, we've got Christina Fisanick, Dr. Christina Fisanick here with us today, and she's all the way from Wheeling, West Virginia. We're so excited to have her. She's a mover and shaker in the world of Northern Appalachia, and one of the founders of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. Wonderful writer with a lot of experience, and I'm so excited to tune in and listen to her session on invention techniques, which is something I know I need very much in my life right now, to get some motivation and some inspiration and some really actionable ways to move forward with all the projects that I have on my mind. And then we will welcome Fred Wilbur to the stage, who has a session titled Why Write, which I got a sneak preview of, and that looks really, really fun and engaging. And so I'm very excited to have both of them here today. And without any further ado, we will also have time after these two presentations for you to share your work. So thank you to those of you who have logged in on Airmeet and who are able to integrate and participate with us here. Feel free to make use of the comments, and whenever we move to sharing our work, you'll have the opportunity to really jump in and work directly with the other people who are logged in Airmeet today. If you are watching from YouTube or Facebook, please make use of all the ways that you can participate through the comments and the like options. You can share. And the share and all of those things to spread the word and get people tuned in to what we have going on today. So without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Christina Fisanick, who is here to talk about writing invention techniques.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I am Dr. Fisanick. I am a professor of English at California University of Pennsylvania, but I do live in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I just happened to be in this part of Pennsylvania on this beautiful day, and I figured, why not do this presentation live for everyone here. So today I'm going to talk about invention techniques. The biggest misnomer I think people have in terms of invention is they think that it's only something you do before you write, because we're always told invention is pre-writing. But in reality, invention needs to happen and should happen throughout the writing process, from before you ever set, words down on paper until you revise. And during the revision process. And so I'm going to talk about a lot of different strategies that I use when I'm teaching writing, and also just working with people who are stuck. So are we ready?
Yeah, let me jump on here and help you share your screen.
Look at me all thinking I know what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah, no, we're all figuring this out as we go.
Right.
All right.
This is a great format. I love it. Okay, so I normally don't use slides, but I thought I have a lot of things that I want to say to all of you about invention exercises, and I also told Jess and Sarah that they could share my slide deck with you in whatever platform they might have, so you can go back and take a look and try out some of the exercises yourself. My biggest problem is knowing where to stop, because over the years I've collected and created so many different invention exercises that knowing that I only had a half an hour of just kind of try to figure out what is the shortest way, but also to give you as many different options as possible. So I titled this presentation Beyond the Prompt, because we all know writing prompts are awesome and they can get us over the hump a lot of times. But sometimes I think people forget that you can do more with a writing prompt than simply free write. You can do all kinds of other things with it. And so these are some invention exercises that hopefully will get you unstuck if you're stuck somewhere. So I think we all know about free writing and looping and things, but I did want to cover those because there are sometimes I think people forget really what free writing is. I know that when I ask writing students to free write, they often say, well, I just kept getting stuck, so I stopped. But remember that the whole point of free writing is that you keep writing and you do not stop writing and you keep going through that process, even if you're writing, you know, I hate this. This is the stupidest thing I ever did, because what the science on this is, and I'm very much into the science of writing. What do we know from studies about the writing process and how we generate ideas and content? But what the science says that if you keep going and you don't stop, you will access a different part of your brain where other ideas live. And so that's the point of continuing that process. I like to do invisible writing with my students, which sounds creepy, and it is, and that's why the students like it. Years ago, and this tells you I've been teaching for 24 years, and this, I think, reflects that. The way that we did invisible writing was with carbon paper. So all the students would have, I was like, what? Carbon paper? All the students would have this little packet with a sheet paper and another sheet under it, and they would use a pen that was out of ink or a broken pen and write so that they couldn't see what they were writing. And then at the end, they would lift up the sheet, and voila, they've got a whole page of writing that they didn't even know that they were capable of doing. These days, I have students turn off their monitor so that they can't edit themselves while they're writing. However, I did have a situation one time in which a student, not thinking, oh, I could just turn my monitor off, covered her screen with a notebook, and that worked. But then I had another student who covered her head with a blanket and was sitting at her desk, and her roommate walked in, and it was like, I don't know what you're doing. You're sitting at your desk with a blanket over your head writing, but I'm gonna go. But it's very effective because it silences that editor. Sometimes writers can't get past the first sentence because the sentence isn't perfect. But by not being able to see, not being able to correct, you don't know what you just wrote, you can't do it. So you have to keep going, and invisible writing works that way. Looping is another strategy that goes along with free writing. Basically, you free write for 5 to 7 minutes, go back, take a look at anything within that batch of free writing that you just did, circle something that maybe sparks an idea, a phrase, a sentence, something, and then start your next round of free writing there, and then do it again and do it again. And students complain if there's no computers in the room because they say their hand hurts because of all the writing. But I find that it's very, very useful, and it's a really good strategy later in the writing process if you're stuck somewhere, like you're writing a draft and maybe you're in the middle and you just don't know like what's going to happen next. This takes you from a very like, I have no idea what I'm doing, to wait a minute, this is an idea, to maybe the last time that you do the looping exercise into something very specific, a turning point that you can actually use. And another writing tool that's very similar to this is character dialogue journaling. And I love doing this when I rarely get to teach fiction because it's not my area at all, but I still love doing it when I have the opportunity. Is when you are struggling with trying to figure out something that maybe is going to happen next in your story, or you're trying to figure out maybe what the voice of a character is, take a sheet of paper, fold it in half, or line up your screen and create 2 columns if you're typing it in. And on one side, write a monologue by one of your characters, and then have another character in your story write back to them on the other half of the page. And it really does work in terms of sort of allowing this free flow of monologue to go on without having to worry about, oh, well, in the structure of this story or this novel, I'm trying to do a dialogue that's engaging to the reader. But in this point, you're not thinking about the reader at all, but rather about the characters and what they're saying and what they would say to each other. So moving on to listing, everybody knows about brainstorming, right? I mean, you can do it in groups, you can do it by yourself, you make a list, you write things down, you don't censor yourself. But I like to do alpha listing with my students, and if they were here, they would be groaning right now because they know it's so difficult, but it's an amazing strategy. So what the science tells us about the way we access information in our brain is that if we go through the expected channels, like listing, because we've all done that, or if we go through free writing, because we've all done that, we're going to continue to get the same results, which might be nothing or nothing usable. But alpha listing requires that you think in a different way. So what you do is you take a letter of the alphabet all the way down the page, all of the letters, which I mistakenly told my students one day were 27. There are in fact 26 letters in the alphabet. And one of them said, "How many degrees in English do you have?" And I was like, well, I can't count. My degrees aren't in math. But the idea is that you make that list of all the letters of the alphabet, and then you make yourself go in order and write something that is related to whatever it is you're working on for each letter of the alphabet. And you don't skip. This forces you to access information in your brain in a different way than you would otherwise access that information. And so the hard part, of course, is getting to Q, X, and Z. So students have gotten creative, and usually they try to say X-ray, because you can X-ray anything they claim. But I encourage them to think about other words, like xenophobia is a great word, right? That starts with X. There are other great words that start with those letters. But this does really, students say, and I've had it happen to me too, that things that I just never saw in my work prior to that just leap out at me, because I'm requiring myself to just give it a different shot in a different way. And of course, if you're stuck in that muddy middle, which happens, I think, to everybody who's ever written anything lengthy, you can try reverse outlining. And I think a lot of people know this as well, but I think sometimes people stop before they get the maximum benefit of it. And so the idea is that you take what you have and go back through it and highlight what you think, what your words are doing. So is this a plot change moment? Or if you're writing a memoir, is this, where you explain this essential part of why you reacted the way you did later in the story? What is your manuscript doing up to this point? So then you can use that and figure out, okay, this is where I've been. This is what I've already covered, the strategies I've already used in working on this piece. And this is where I need to go. So the reverse outline can do that in a way that maybe just reading back through the manuscript isn't enough, because I think we all do that. A lot of writers start their day by reading what they just wrote, but this makes you go back and talk about to yourself about what your manuscript is actually doing and where, what your writing is doing and where. So the next section is called Seeing is Believing, and this is really another way to get us to use different parts of our brain in the writing process. This is my favorite activity of all time, because it's given me personally more movement in what I've been working on than anything else. And so the idea is this: choose a fictional place if you're writing fiction, or a real place if you're like me and you write memoir. Sketch its layout, and I'm the worst drawer. I always tell my students that stick figures with top hats are my forte. And in the drawing world, it's the only thing that's recognizable. So don't worry about whether your drawing it makes sense or if it's to scale or anything like that. But as you draw this place, walk around in that place mentally and start annotating the stories, the memories that come to your mind as you're walking through that place in a way that a photograph, like people always say, well, can I just look at a picture of that place? And you can, but that picture, whoever took that picture, whether it was a past you or somebody else, is a view of it that's limited. But whenever you're going through your memories as you walk through this place, through this drawing, you're creating new opportunities for new ideas in your writing. And the best anecdote I can give you about that, in terms of how it worked for me, for years and years, I told my students this story about how when my grandmother was 2 years old, she was sitting in a little dress by the door of her grandparents' house, and all of a sudden a gloved hand reached in the door and started pulling her by her dress tail out the door. Somebody was trying to kidnap her. Her grandfather got his shotgun out. Remember West Virginia here? Got the shotgun out and was aimed it out and shot outside, and there were blood tracks in the snow the next day. And I mean, that on its surface is a crazy dramatic story, right? But until I started mapping that on the board to talk with my students about it, I didn't even realize what I had been missing all this time. The reason why my grandmother kept telling that story, I believe, and she told it over and over again to the point where I knew it backwards and forwards and upside down, is because she wanted to believe, and she wanted everybody she told that story to believe, that of course her dad wanted her, because she didn't know her dad ever. She had never met him in her entire life. She didn't know who he was. But she continued to tell that story over and over again to let us all know, and to remind herself that of course she wanted her dad to find her. And that only came out during this, sketching activity that made me, made the spatial connections that you can't do this if you're just rewriting. So another way of doing that, I love the Venn diagram, and I think most people know what those are. So you've got, and I've got an illustration here, but you have a circle on one side and a circle on the other, and what happens in between. And so what I like to do, and you might think, well, what can I do with that if I'm not writing like a research paper? Well, you can do this with anything. You can talk about a concept in your writing here and a concept here and see where they overlap, but you could also talk about characters. Like sometimes we don't realize, what our characters have in common, or what our places have in common, and this is a way to figure that out. And I can give you another example of that. So about 6 years ago, one of my students was out driving and partying one night and got really intoxicated and drove her car to 120 miles per hour and crashed. And although the other people in the car survived, she died about a week later. And I kept trying to figure out, how do I cope with this? And I always cope with everything with writing. And I kept writing about it and writing about it and writing about it, and I couldn't make sense of it. And so I put like sort of the facts of the case in one circle, and I was thinking, what does this remind me of? What does it remind me of? And it reminded me of being in a car as a young person, probably a little older than her, going 120 mile an hour. I wasn't driving, a friend was driving. And those were the similarities. And so I wrote about that, those two different scenes. And the big difference, of course, is that I survived and she didn't. And so by looking at those things, what's the same and what's different, what's different and what's the same, allowed me to get to a deeper meaning and to make a connection for telling that story. Because otherwise, it's a sad story, but making that connection between how sometimes we can engage in the same kind of reckless behavior, and some of us live and some of us don't, and why is there a way to even understand why. The next sort of spatial activity I do is cubing, and I actually do this when I have my students in front of me. Like personally, we haven't been in the same classroom together since COVID, but I have a giant cube at my house that I take with me, like a literal big cube that I made. And on one side, all 6 sides have a different thing. So one side says description, and one side says comparison contrast, one side says association, analysis, application, argumentation, and I make them roll the dice. And it's so big that you literally have to get up and roll it across the floor. And whatever comes up, then that's what they write about with their whatever topic that they're working on. And they might be at the point where they're just coming up with an idea for something they're writing about, or they're stuck somewhere at the beginning or in the middle. And so description asks them to think about whatever it is that they're writing about in terms of the 5 senses and looking beyond the surface, getting past that sort of initial, what am I seeing? What is it? What does it smell like? What is it taste or feel like? Whenever you touch it, what does it taste like? Those kinds of things. In comparison, contrast, what is this thing that you're writing about? What's it similar to? Was it different from? Association, what does it make you think about? How do you connect it to other things? Analysis, what is it made of? How does it work? Application, what can you do with it? What uses does it have? Like, what's the point? And then argumentation, what arguments can you make for it? And you always think, well, I'm always going to make an argument for it because it's my thing. But this requires you to think about what arguments you can make against it. So you can get maybe in the side of somebody who wouldn't agree with you, or you might be able to see a different side of a character. Like maybe you're against them, and here's why. So that's another spatial activity. And then, of course, clustering. I know a lot of you probably know this as webbing, or I've heard circling. I've heard all kinds of different ways to talk about this. But it's basically you put something you're thinking about in the circle, in the middle, and then you branch out from there and free associate. I used to absolutely hate this activity until a student came in one day and she's like, I did it. I went home and I did it. Her dad was a butcher. And that sounded kind of weird, but she had access to butcher paper, the big rolls of butcher paper. And she brought with her one day a roll that she did this activity on for her paper that stretched from one end of the classroom to another, which if you were here, you would know it was about as big as this building is from one side to another. And it was filled with clusters. And the idea is that, again, like with other activities, it frees you from, sort of accessing information linearly and allows you to just kind of go wherever, your mind takes you. And students love to watch me demonstrate this because I ask them to give me a word, any word, and I guarantee I can come up with 15 minimum ideas for writing projects. And of course, they've given me everything from carrots to spaceships to shoe, and they try to stump me all the time. And they're like, you'll never be able to find, we're going to give you zebra. What can you come up with that? And I always, every time, come up with all kinds of things. And so the example I give you here, I have space in the middle. And I go off from that. Outside, window, blinds, vision, revision. That reminds me that I want to do an essay where I talk about revision techniques. And it reminded me, I totally forgot about it. Outside, spring, vaccine, joy. I'd love to write an essay about what it was like waiting. I haven't seen my parents yet because they just got their first vaccine and they're about to get another one. And I would love to write an essay about what that was like standing on the sidewalk for a year, looking at my mother and dad on the porch and not being able to go and see them. And so that, who would ever think that space, though, would make me move from that thing to that thing. I also thought of Mars. I thought of the rover and the whole thing that's happening with that. Rover made me think of dog, which made me think of how you had to be responsible to get a dog. And that made me think of my son, who really wants a dog, and sort of where we are. I just recently got divorced, and do we take on a dog in the middle of sort of this upheaval after everything? Are we ready to move on? I'd love to write an essay about that, or provide some tips for other people who are in the same situation, and so on. And so the rest of this is about that, about Zoom exhaustion, where I am, and Virginia Woolf and A Rumor of One Zone, and that whole concept of space, and how I just got my home office back because my ex had it for so long, and how it changed everything in terms of productivity, in terms of just sort of where I am mentally and with my work and so on. And so that's just the one word, and I was able to create all those potential writing ideas. And then something that I never imagined that I would be cool with, and that is writing with other people, or inventing with other people. Writing, we all think of it as like a solitary activity because most of us do write alone. But I just recently wrote a book with my colleague from the Heinz History Center, and he would tell you this if he was here, he's significantly dyslexic. He's severely dyslexic. So he has trouble with making sense of words. He'll write things down and be like, no, that's not what I mean. This is what I mean. And we had to figure out, how do we write a book together of our work that we've been doing for 8 years, when he has, this way of seeing the world, which I think is actually an attribute and certainly not anything negative, because he sees the world in a different way, and I think it's partly because of his situation with dyslexia. So, but what do we do? How do we write this? And so what we did, we used Google Docs and Zoom, and we would go in together every day and work on our manuscript, and it was actually really amazing. But then that made me think about, well, how do groups work together to invent, either in the middle of the process or before? And my students have done all kinds of crazy activities, but these are some things that work really, really well. You can use a beanbag or anything that won't give someone a concussion, because you want to toss it to other people in the room. And it's sort of like popcorn prayers, if you know what those are, or popcorn activities where one person, when it's their turn, they say an idea, and another person says an idea, and another person says an idea. But in this case, it's very physical. A lot of my early research was on the relationship between movement and writing, and movement and learning. And we know that if we get people up and moving, we get different things from them than we would if they're just sitting in their chair all day, which is why Zoom is such a drag, in part. But with beanbag toss, you're actually physically moving your body. You have to catch it, and then when you get it, you shout out whatever comes to your mind immediately. So, one, it gets you moving. Two, you have to be aware, so you're not like thinking too much about what you're about to say. So it clears these sort of pathways and really allows people to share what's on their mind in a way that is unfiltered, which obviously can be bad sometimes, but in this case, usually that leads to something good. We also use a tool, and we just used this the other day, called Jamboard. I don't know if you guys know Jamboard. It's through Google. It's free. And what happens is it pulls up this board, like a virtual board, that you can use with other people, and you can add photos to it and images and text and writing. And I love doing this because every single person has a space where they can be heard. A lot of times when you're inventing with other people, there's people like me who's always like, but wait, I got an idea. And then this poor person in the back who really is probably smarter than me and has better ideas than I do. We don't hear from them because somebody like me is up front yelling all the time saying, I got ideas. This way, everybody gets to share, and everybody's idea is equal because there's a space for everyone to put their ideas in, whether it's a visual idea or written idea or otherwise. And then question and answers, it's really fun. It's kind of like playing Cards Against Humanity, because you don't know, you're asking a question and providing an answer, but you don't know the question or the answer. And so the idea is you fold a sheet of paper in half. Say there's two of us that are doing this, 2 sheets of paper. And on one side of that paper, I'm going to write a question. And on the other side, I'm going to write an answer. And then I give it to the other person, and they fold it up, and they provide an anonymous question, an anonymous answer. And then you see how the question and the answer fits together, and you get these wacky combinations that lead to really interesting story ideas. And then, of course, there's going techno. There's a great free site called wordclouds.com. And what I like to do with that, if I'm really stuck and I'm like, what am I even doing in this piece of writing? Like, what is the point of it? Why am I going to keep going? What is the essence of this work, or why am I spending all this time in it? I will copy and paste the whole thing and put it in wordclouds.com. They'll generate a cloud for me, which you can see I put an example cloud here. It's actually in cloud shape, but you can do whatever you want. The idea is that whatever words are the biggest, are the sort of predominant ideas in that text. And in this case, it's community, history, digital, student, research, and students again. And obviously students are very important in community and research. But if you look at the smaller words, which you can't see on here because I had to shrink it to make it fit this graphic, those might be the forgotten areas that you didn't even realize that you still had some things that you wanted to talk about. And it also, I think, shapes up the idea that, oh, really what this project is that I'm talking about is communities and students and research. And the last thing I want to talk about is productive silence, something that I am not good at. And if anybody knows me, they will, my co-host from One Alive is here, and he would agree with that. But the idea is that sometimes we just have to be quiet and listen without our paper, without our pen, without our computer, without our books. And I've listed some things here that we might even want to think about. If you're not meditating, and you might want to consider things like looking at something in a new way. Remember that anything is possible and that there's no bad answers. That there is nothing right or wrong about what you're writing. It's all good. Put it down there. Quit judging yourself and judging your writing whenever you haven't finished it yet. You're still in process. And that sometimes things have no answers, and that's okay. That sometimes that our best resolution in a story is that there is no resolution. So those are some things to think about if you're stuck in the writing process at any point. And that's sort of a whirlwind tour of things that I would obviously spend a lot more time on if I had more time. If you have any questions for me, though, I've added my email. It's fisanick@calu.edu. And I would love to talk with anybody that needs to get a little unstuck. And sometimes that's the biggest thing, is talking to somebody about where you are and, trying to get out of being stuck. Thank you all.
All right, so we will stop sharing our screen here. Does anybody have any questions for Christina? If you want to click the raise hand button. There was one question about whether the PowerPoint would be available for future use, and with your permission, we can put it on our workshop site.
Absolutely.
So that you guys can look through that. Again, that was a great presentation there. Excuse me. Does anybody last chance? Anybody have anybody here? Oh, I got a question here. Go ahead.
Christina, you talk about the science behind these activities. I find that very intriguing and interesting, but everybody thinks differently. There are visual people, there are word people, there are other kinds of people. Does the science work for everybody? Because everybody's brain's not wired the same.
Well,
are some activities better for other people than others? So you're going to have to repeat that.
This question just in case.
Oh yeah. So his question was this: that since we all sort of are different kinds of thinkers, some of us think more spatially than others. Some of us need to hear things to process them, and so on. Do all of these sort of techniques work for everybody? No. And that's why I always teach so many. Like for some, and they don't all work for all writing projects either. I mean, for some projects, I would never think to use clustering because it's just, that's not what I need in that moment at that time. And for some people, some of these activities will never work because that's not the way their brain works and that's not the way their minds work. But what we do know from the science is that if you study enough people, that you do get a consensus about how things are processed through the brain. So what we know is that if you change up the way that you access information, you're going to get a different output. To think of ourselves as computers. If you try a different algorithm, you're going to get a different output in the end. And so that's the point of giving people such a diverse range of possibilities for getting unstuck or to create new ideas. Usually we have the answers in our brains. We just don't know how to get those answers out. I hope that answers the question.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned before you started about that you've done a lot of research, and that definitely shows in what you put together, which is incredible. I'm wondering if was there something that you published, or was this for the classroom, or is there a way to kind of see your process and coming up with all of this?
No, I've actually never written on it. This is the quandary, right?
If you could repeat your question.
Yeah, so Jess asked this question, well, where could you find like the publications like that I have done about this? I almost never get to write about the things I do in the classroom because I'm doing things in the classroom. And so it's difficult, and that's why the last book that I wrote about digital storytelling and public history, there are a lot of writing exercises in there, but they are geared specifically towards creating digital stories. And so they can obviously be used and molded in different ways, but if you want to find this research, it is out there. I have used other people's studies and then tried them out in my own classroom with my own students. But my field of study, composition and rhetoric, and also writing studies in general, creative writing studies, there's so much information out there. So if you look at a database that collects material from academic journals, like Academic Search Complete is one of them, and there's like the ERIC database, which is the Education Research and Something database. They will show you some of these studies. But I've tried, because my area is composition and rhetoric, to base a lot of the instruction I do in the classroom not just on anecdotal experience with my students, but also what's the science behind this? Why are we doing this? Is there any kind of trials that people have done with people while they're writing. And what do we know? What have we learned? And I try to incorporate both of those things, both the experience and the research.
I think that kind of flows into another question that we had here. Patricia Beshart asked, have you adapted these techniques to a virtual environment?
Oh, yes.
Something that you've done a lot of work with.
Yeah, so that's how Jamboard came about. I started using it in class because I couldn't figure out a way to help my students. Like, one of the things that we've always done when we're together is I'll put up a poster board, like these giant sticky Post-it notes, all around the room, and then students right there say their topic or their thesis on the board, and then everybody has to write something about whatever that topic is below it, and then they have this big sheet of paper that they take with them. So it gets people up out of their desks, makes them leave a mark and think about the work, but also creates this amazing amount of stuff that a writer can take with them. So I switched to Jamboard, and so that's another way that I've adapted to that technology. Plus, we do a lot of stuff with Google Docs so that it's all live. It's happening right whenever we're doing it, which has actually been, I actually enjoy that part of it more than hearing all these squeaky markers on the whiteboard and having to wait for one person to be done and then the marker is drained or whatever and all this craziness. But if you can do that in Google Docs, you can do it simultaneously and talk about it while it's being done. So it's all actually translated pretty well, thankfully, because of great technologies through Google and through Zoom and other platforms that we use in the classroom.
So we've got a couple comments and questions here. Ed comments, things with more words work better than shorter works because it weighs the size of the words in the output based upon how often they are used. So shorter works, would there be enough to create a meaningful pattern?
I have found no. So that if you have just a short poem or a short blurb, you have to have something that's a little bit more substantial, like a full page of writing to use in SoundCloud. But I also have used, had students take like a shorter piece and give it to someone else and have them cross out all the nouns or have them circle all the verbs or something like that. That gives you a similar effect that SoundCloud does, but with an actual person, sitting next to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do shorter text that way.
I go another question here in the comments. How does your approach change for specific markets, or does it remain constant across different markets?
Different markets, meaning like different writing markets, like genres?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Because it does change. I mean, some of these are more useful for argument and persuasion than they might be for poetry. But I think it depends on where you are in that process. So, I mean, I've tailored what I'm doing with specific prompts and these exercises before. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And they're not always all useful for all genres. It just depends on what you're working on.
Do you have any other questions from the group? Any other comments? Anybody else who's joining us on Airmeet want to raise their hand or ask a question here? Christina? I think that we have answered these. Good deal. Could you suggest a couple of seminal studies regarding these techniques?
Off the top of my head, no, but I could certainly include that when I send you guys the slides.
That would be
I can give you a bibliography of great studies.
All kinds of homework now to do.
Yeah, then there's a lot of studies about the teaching of grammar because people get bent out of shape over that all the time. Like, we have to teach nouns and verbs and predicate nominatives, when in reality what the studies have definitively proven since 1906 is that drills and skills do not work, that students cannot transfer what they learn on a worksheet to their own writing. It has to be within the context of the writing, and it has to be purposeful. But people still argue about that. But there's like literally over 100 years of studies that prove that. So I can definitely send you a bibliography of places that if people want to actually look at the studies that people have done. And at this point, there's so many great ones out there that look at not just invention, but look at sort of the writing brain at work. And how we can work with it, with our skill sets, to improve what we do on the page.
Well, I know that I've already imposed this question on you, but I would love to get a blog article on you, diving more into that kind of subject. We can link to whatever you've got going on there. So anyway,
Sure, I'd be glad to do it.
thank you, Christina.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
Having you here.
I feel like a celebrity.
I know. Well, that was a really well thought out workshop. So thank you. Justine, might come in on introducing our next.
All right, I'm moving on.
Good job, Christina.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Very good.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. One of my favorite things about what we do with the Watershed Journal is having these workshops. And it's been so hard since we've all gone remote and we've been quarantined and in various states of not being able to get together, to put together something really meaningful and a way to keep everybody connected and keep that energy going. And I feel so good about what we have going on today with Dr. Fisanick's presentation and all these actionable ways to encourage and promote your writing practice. So I know that I have a lot to look forward to with implementing those in my own time with my work, and I so appreciate that. So now we have another presentation with Fred Wilbur, and Fred is a member of the Stained Glass Writers in Punxsutawney. He's working with a memoir group. He's got a lot going on, and I said this earlier, but I had a sneak preview of his presentation, and it is a lot of fun. So I'm excited to introduce Fred Wilbur. Thank you, Fred.
How are we doing on time?
We're doing really good.
Good
You
time.
are all set.
Christina, it's a hard act to follow.
I've heard that before. And it's usually after I've fallen on the stage.
A lot of material. I really appreciate listening to that. I took a lot of notes. I may contact you later. Help me start my presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Christina came with a doctor title in front of her name, so she's already qualified to, she comes with a certain set of qualifications. If you get a doctor's degree, obviously you learn something along the line, or else you're good at fooling people. So my presentation's on why write, or why writers write, or why you should write. So let's get on with this, and let's first of all talk about who I am. Why am I here to facilitate this workshop? I don't have a doctor's title, but I do have some qualifications, and I'll give you 3 of my experiences. The first thing is I know how to solve problems. I solved problems for 45 years in the technology industry. Why writing? Why anything? Anything with a question mark is a problem to solve. So I've got experience in solving problems. After I retired, my wife tells me I still solve problems. So I was cutting grass in the field one day, and I got tired of cutting down straight lines. And my wife says, "You got to cut those thistles." So I just started cutting the thistles. And there's a picture of my field, and I cut a maze. And then I got challenged further and decided to put a labyrinth in the middle of the maze. So that was my problem solving. Boredom on the tractor does that to you. So I can solve problems. I've also have a little bit of experience doing research, putting material together, organizing material. So I asked myself for the last 3 years since I've been actively plugged into the writing people here in this area, asked myself, why am I writing? I don't have a lot of answers, so I went off and researched that. And I asked myself, why am I writing? But in the process, I found out why other people write. And for the last month, since I was asked to do this workshop, I went off and did more research and read about a dozen websites and a few books and put all that material together for today's presentation. Anybody who writes probably either knows or are asking themselves that question. Right? I also been told by my wife, again, that I'm pretty good at asking probing questions, that I can provoke thought. I can also provoke other feelings that are not so pleasant, but I have been known to provoke thought, and Jess will probably confer with that. So when you attend a workshop, you should ask yourself, what's in it for you? What are you here for? What do you want to take away? So what's in it for you today, I submit, is you're going to get some information, like Christina presented information that was very valuable. Hopefully the information I'll present will be valuable. You might get some introspection about yourself. You may start thinking about your own motivations. And you may find you may be motivated to go write for some reasons you weren't aware of. So let's talk about this. Let's look at the agenda. We're going to talk about a survey where somebody did, they asked 100 published writers why they write. And they combined that information, and we're going to show you the results of that. Some interesting things we'll find. And then we're going to get audience to participate. If we have an audience, maybe the people in the room can help. And it's going to be a match game about, we're going to show you what some known authors have said why they write. We're going to match the authors up with what they said. It's kind of a fun game. And then I'm going to ask everybody who feels comfortable doing it to share why they write. A short sentence in the chat or comments in the room about why they write. And then I'm going to talk about some health aspects of writing, both pros and cons. And then we'll leave it open for Q&A at the end. All right, so 100 published authors were asked why do they write. And they got 137 responses because some people gave more than one answer. And most people may have more than one answer about why they write. They took those responses and they categorized them into a very busy pie chart. The pie chart shows 16 different categories or reasons for writing. And they range from, if you can read it, from it's your profession to I'm trying to express myself. Well, that's way too much data for me. I like to do a 50,000-foot view, so I took those answers and I basically summarized them. So I took those that related to writing for other people, and that's the educators. I'm right to educate people, or to influence somebody, or to basically help other people. So if you lump all those together, we find that 30% of the people surveyed write for other people. And then there's also that category of I write because I have to. My friend Byron Hoot, for example, will say, I write because I do. And he means he just has to. Every morning he writes. Every Friday I see something from him. So they write because they have a passion inside. They feel that they're possessed to write. Some people write for therapeutic reasons, that they do it because they want to get their confusion in their brain out on paper. 23% of the people who responded write for those reasons. Then there's those group of people who write for creative purposes. They use it as a tool to express their creativity. So they either have an imagination that's overactive. I think, Rich, you pointed out earlier, you've got that problem. I've got that problem. So they write because they're creative and they use it as a mechanism. So 23% of the respondents write for those reasons. And then there's the giblets of all the other stuff you can't categorize easy. So I just lump it into one big thing. And there's probably a half a dozen there. But they run from it's my job, I'm in marketing, or I'm curious, so I write for curiosity reasons, or I read something that stimulated me to write, or I'm trying to be famous, or I want to get some exposure somewhere. So they write for those other minor reasons. And hopefully that adds up to 100%. Did you add it up?
Right, you've been keeping track, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I thought you would. So when we talk later on about why some famous authors write, we're going to match up some people's names to what their reasons were. We'll also think about these categories and think about that yourself. You can start at the top. Let's play a match game. So what I've got is a reason here on the screen, and then I'm going to give you 5 authors. And your mission is to find out and to realize and guess who wrote the reason. So this writer wrote, writers write for 4 reasons: sheer egotism, aesthetic enthusiasm, historical impulse, or political purposes. And interesting enough, those 4 reasons almost map to the categories I did earlier. And I didn't do that deliberately, by the way. But who do you think? I've got 5 authors here, ranging from James Joyce, Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, throw your answer in the comments. We got one answer.
Somebody? Oh,
we got a George Orwell vote. Who got your vote since?
Ed Frank. You got a guess?
Orwell.
You think Orwell? We got 2 Orwells. Well, let's see who they are.
Orwell?
We got 3 Orwells. Well, Collie, you guys are great. I'm amazed. I couldn't have done that. So how about another one? My aim is to put down on paper what I see and what I feel in the best and simplest way. Well, we know it's not George because he's already gave an answer. So you got 4 choices now. James Joyce, Mr. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, or Faulkner?
What's our votes?
We got one Hemingway. We got two Hemingways. We got a Fitzgerald. Okay.
Faulkner.
Faulkner.
A lone Faulkner.
How about Hemingway? Now,
Yeah.
I haven't read a lot of Hemingway, and it's been many years ago, and I didn't think he wrote anything in a simple way, but maybe that's me. All right, let's try this one. You don't write because you want to say something. You write because you've got something to say. Well, it's not.
Joyce, we got a vote
It's
for
not
Joyce.
Orwell. We got a Joyce up there.
We got a vote from Joyce.
That's what I said.
Well, who do you think?
James Joyce.
James
Wayne
Joyce?
says Joyce. Anybody
I'm
else?
gonna go with Faulkner.
Did you go
Faulkner.
with Faulkner? Anybody else? We got any other answers coming in? So we got a few Joyce and a Faulkner there. Let's see. It's Mr. Fitzgerald.
Oh.
So better responses than I thought.
Yeah, you picked tricky.
Yeah. So here's one. Here's another one. Oh, let's get some new authors up. These are old authors. So there's 5 new authors, and by the way, one of them is a local author.
In this room.
Those of us who write do it because there are stories inside of us burning to get out. It's an internal passion. It's a story got to get out. So we got J.K. Rowling, Anne Rice, Jess Weibel, Stephen King, and Judy Blume.
We got a Stephen King vote. What else?
We got a Stephen King vote.
Anne Rice.
And you think Anne Rice?
J.K. Rowling.
You think J.K. Rowling? Well, actually, it's Judy Blume. And nobody got that one. I don't think anybody in the
It's not
chat's
Byron
got that.
Cross, I guess.
This is good. We got some great people participating. That's great.
But you remember as a kid.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
maybe that was just.
All right. Writing makes my life a brighter and more pleasant place. Now, this is a little tricky.
That was probably not William Stern.
It wasn't me either.
All right, I have
We
a
got a vote for Rowling.
We got a vote for Rowling. Anybody else want to guess on this one? This is a little tricky.
Stephen King says Ed.
Oh, Ed says Stephen King?
Yeah.
Ed Frank, huh? Wow. Ed's, okay, Mr. Ed Frank's right. Stephen King. I pulled this out of Stephen King's
Right.
book.
Yes.
Now, here's my theory on why Stephen King said this. He's one of the top 5 richest writers in the United States. If you got that much money, you definitely have a more pleasant place to live, right? So that's my theory. And I pulled that out of his book on writing. So let's do one more. Writers write about what obsesses them. When I'm writing, the darkness is always there. I go where the pain is.
That sounds like Anne
Anne
Rice.
Rice.
Two Anne Rice.
I got 2 Anne Rices in the room. Do we have anybody?
We have an Anne
We
Rice.
got Anne Rice on. Yeah,
It's unanimous.
it definitely is Anne Rice.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. This is so much fun. Let's do this one. All right. I don't write to empty my mind. Oh, let's get some authors up. 5 new authors. Wait, there's one in there that not like the others. There's one in there that's not like the others. She's a new author. So anyhow, all right. So we got Lord Byron, Mark Twain, this guy called Fred Wilbur, and Truman Capote, and J.R. Tolkien. So one of them said, if I don't write to empty my mind, I go mad.
You're going to vote for Byron? Who else?
Well, you're not mad anyway.
Tolkien?
So, I mean, writing,
Tolkien,
writing.
You got a Byron, a Tolkien,
All right, here comes the answer, folks.
another
Who's it?
Twain?
Oh, wow. Lord Byron said that.
Lord Byron.
Yeah. All right. 2 more. This is the second to the last one here. To me, the greatest pleasure of writing is not what it's about, but the inner music that words make.
Capote?
You got a Capote.
Got a Capote. Wow. I'm impressed. We got some people really. A Tolkien? And
Tolkien, another
a
Capote.
Capote. We got 2 Capotes. 2 for Capotes.
I think Capote.
You
Yeah.
think Capote too? Here we go. You ready for the answer? You got it right. You're right. Good job. All right. Now here's one that I don't think Ed Frank's going to get.
Okay, Ed, here's the.
I write because
Oh.
making pottery is dirty, and playing the piano makes my dog howl.
Twain.
Twain.
Mark Twain said
Oh,
that.
hey, two twins and that Fred guy. We got
Yeah,
one vote.
yeah, we got one vote for.
Two votes for Fred.
Oh,
two
yeah.
votes for Twain.
Well, Mark Twain. If I saw Mark Twain on a potter's wheel, that would be funny. It was actually my answer. I wanted to give that so people who know me would be able to get one right. There you go. Well, since everybody's warmed up on participating in the chat area, let's now ask them to share why they write. And before why they're doing that, I will give you my serious reasons. My serious reason is about 1975, I found some stuff I started writing. And back then, 30 years ago, I was doing it as a cathartic process to get some, I was in a dark and difficult time. And if I hadn't have been writing, I don't think I would have stayed sane. Now, there's an argument about whether I was sane or not, but it saved me to be able to write, to get that out, to get that pain and that ugliness out. However, today, my life's different. And today, I find it as a creative exercise. I have a phenomenal amount of creativity. The potter's wheel is too limiting. My skills at the piano is not good enough to express it there. So I use writing, which is my weakest thing. I am actually horrible at writing. But I use it as a medium to express my internal imagination. So that's why I write. So I'd like to have everybody put, if they can, or they can share it in the room verbally, why they write. Do we have anybody?
Yeah, we've got Ed started us off here. It helps me both deal with stress and express creativity.
So Ed does it both for internal purging of stress and creativity reasons. That's good.
Yeah, anyone else on Airmeet, put in the chat your reasons. Anyone here have an answer to the question?
Christina, can I ask you that? Put you on the spot.
Well, I won my first writing contest when I was 9, and I come from I was partially raised by an incredible storyteller, and she gave me so many stories that I had no other outlet other than writing. I've never. People have always asked me, "What did you want to be when you grew up?" And I said, "A writer," from the time I can remember. So I really think of it as my vocation. And I can't imagine not writing. I've had a lot of horrible things happen in my life, and writing has been my the thing that kept me from.
I hear multiple reasons there, but it's all from internal. It's use it as expressive creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I want people to read my writing, but if they don't, I don't care. I'll
Mm-hmm.
keep doing it anyway. It's like I'll talk to myself too. So whatever.
Use it as a tool to tell stories. I had a realization today, which I shouldn't have had today because it's a fact that's been around forever. There's something about putting something internal, a story internal, down on paper. When you put it on paper, it becomes forever. It's fixed. It's real. It's concrete, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internal, it's just there. It's like, it can go away in a fluff. It's like software. It doesn't really exist, right? You can't see it and touch it, right? But when you put it on paper, it becomes concrete. It's like when you take a hunk of clay, right? You take a hunk of clay and it's just a hunk, but you turn it into a piece of pottery, it becomes real, right? And it can last until somebody drops it and breaks it. So writing is similar to that. It becomes real. And I suspect there's science behind that, right?
Well, the science behind it says that like trauma survivors, they can actually heal from PTSD through writing by rewriting their story. So instead of seeing themselves in their minds as victims of something awful, they can rewrite the story to see themselves as being survivors.
And heroes.
For those of you on Airmeet who can't hear Christina, perfect segue. She says that people with PTSD use writing to help cure themselves, right? Which leads us to...
We've got a couple more here I'd just like to read real quick before you
please
move
do.
on.
Yeah.
Patricia comments, with poetry I have no choice. It wells up. With historical nonfiction, I'm compelled to tell the stories about the people I write about. Lynn says, I love to read as a child, and I love the places it would take me. As an adult, I want to clear my head of the thoughts that clutter it and be able to leave a legacy for my children. Ooh, the legacy.
I like the legacy part,
And
yeah.
Wayne, as a Wrenchy, I write because it's my turn. Seriously. I don't know if perhaps I find the answer. I'll stop. There we go.
Good.
I'd like to add also, I write to connect.
You write to
I write to
connect.
connect, to encourage people to laugh. I can be a shy person sometimes, So that helps me connect. And to encourage people to laugh, to think, to...
Repeat that for the...
Yeah, so if it's hard to hear at home, David's saying that he writes to connect, to spark something, to have a way of talking to people and of pushing them in different directions. I'm summarizing, so I hope that, okay, good deal. You're doing great.
Well, Christina brought up the process of PTSD, which brings us to health aspects of writing. There are pros and there are cons. And let's talk about the cons first, get those out of the way. All right, if you sit at a desk all day or long periods of time, you're going to end up with carpal tunnel issues or tendon disorders. And if you write by hand, you probably also have issues with that too. So that's an occupational hazard. If you look at a screen all day long, it's not good for you. Screens today are better than the old Catherine you read too. They're still not good for you. So you have vision, eye disorders, and you can get headaches from doing this. So sitting all day long looking at a screen is a con. Overweight, you're sitting all day long, you're not moving. And it's an issue. I did tech work. I've done tech work all my life, and I have to go out and offset that with some other activity. Repetitive stiffness syndrome. I sit, and you do this at the potter's wheel too, right? And you sit at the potter's wheel, and I have to get up and move every 15, 30 minutes. When I do it, it's like I'm all like, oh. And stress and depression are a little bit different. Stress and depression come from writers who are writing under duress. Either they have a commitment, or they're being paid, or they're commissioned, or you have a deadline to meet. That creates a fair amount of stress. Sometimes you get stressed because you're stuck somewhere. Writing is a lonely process, and you can beat yourself up a lot doing it, and you can get depressed on that, so it can also create depression. The good news is, if there's any good news here, the good news is a lot of the activities to offset one of these can offset more than one. For example, getting away from your desk. The recommendation is for every, I think, hour of writing, they want you to take 1 or 2 minutes a break. So every 30 minutes to an hour, get up and walk and take a 1 or 2 minute break. Balancing your life with writing and your other physical activities, whether it be cutting grass or going to the gym or playing pickleball, in my case, that's a good thing to do because it offsets the stillness of sitting all day long. Looking away from the screen. If you're sitting reading a screen all day long, just looking away to get your eyes to focus in a different plane helps your eyesight issues. So those are the things you can do to offset some of those issues. In the area of stress and depression, I submit to you that you got to get social. You have to force yourself out of your loneliness and go get social. Plug in with your writer friends, or your other hobby friends. In my case, I do pickleball friends. But you got to do something else to be social. Because if you don't, you become an unusual person. 3 years ago, I used to do tech work all the time, and I sit at the computer all day long, and I talk to computers. I don't even talk to people. And computers work differently than people. I mean, they're predictable. People are not. So I told my wife, I says, Rita, I got to do something. I said, I got to go out and practice my social skills because I'm not social anymore. I don't know how to behave around people, right? So I started getting out. I plugged in with writing group people, and now she says, you spend too much time doing that. But anyway, so that's the cons. But let's talk about some pros. Now, there's a group here that writing can help you think. It can benefit your cognitive skills. It can help reduce depression, as we've already talked about. And it can actually reduce asthma and arthritic symptoms. Now, there was a study done of 112 people that have asthma and arthritic symptoms. And they told 60 of them to go off and write about something significant. 20 minutes a day, I think they asked them to do this. And the other 40 or 60, they were told to go off and write about anything they wanted to. And then after a period of a few weeks, they measured the symptoms of your asthma and or arthritic was rheumatoid arthritis. And they measured the symptoms of that. And those people who wrote about something significant had a 23% reduction in symptoms. Now, 112 people is not a big study, So if you go look at the details behind that, you can question it. Of course, you can question any research done. But the fact is, it was statistically significant to get 23% increase in reduction. So writing actually helped, but they wrote about something significant. It can improve your focus. It can improve your attention. It can help you plan. It does reduce stress, as we talked about. You can actually learn when you write. Many of us do research when we write. We learn. We learn about ourselves when we write. Writing about memoirs, you'll learn about yourself. It can improve your immune function. Interesting enough. They found you can actually improve your sleep quality, your REM sleep, and your length of sleep. They did a study of, I think, 90 people, and they've asked half the people to write about something good in their life. They spend 15 minutes before they went to sleep to write about something positive in their life. And the other people, they could do anything they want. But half the people who were writing about something positive in their life right before they went to sleep actually had an increase in their REM sleep and the length of quality of their sleep. So I found that kind of interesting. Again, the sample size is not very large, but it was an interesting study in the field. It can lower your blood pressure, reduce your hospital stay, and improve your liver functions. And there was, again, another study done on that where they measured the results of that. And there was actually an interesting study done in Australia for a small sample of people. I think it was like 90 people, maybe 60, where they actually did punch biopsies on their arms. And what they wanted to do is they broke the group into two groups. And half the people, they were told to write something stimulating. Now, it could be good or bad, but it was something stimulating. And the other half, they could write about anything again. And those who wrote about something stimulated actually healed faster. So I found that was an interesting study. So there's a lot of good things about writing that you can get. It can improve the quality of your life. I think it can also be fun. It can also be hard. I mean, I find it very difficult because writing is such a difficult process for me. Is there any comments on this? Does anybody else have any ideas about health aspects of writing?
Yeah, we had a comment from Patricia. She's been working really hard on a book, Curse, that she's just put out. That's coming out later this fall. But she said, my left-hand pinky went numb writing Curse after work every day. Yeah, anybody else, anyone from Airmeet have comments about the health pros and cons? Anybody here have any thoughts about a balance? And
I would say, I think what you were saying about activity goes along with what Christina was saying about our brain, how our brains work. And I find that, like, especially in the winter months, if I'm not out and going for a walk and going to places and socializing and all of those things, my writing suffers pretty dramatically. Yeah, It's hard to keep it up. And I have way more of those moments where I'm just kind of like staring blankly at the screen and like hoping that something will happen, but I just can't get it to click or connect.
Try an invention exercise.
I know, that's why I needed those. Yeah, I'm so glad.
So I don't know if they could hear her or not, but Jess basically said be active, and it helped her on her creative process, right? Yeah, that's good. Anything else on that?
I had a couple comments here.
You do?
But those were before I should check it.
Well, it is time for question and answers. So
anybody who is, I'm going to go back to this. Anybody who is joining us from Airmeet, go ahead and raise your hand. And you can come on the screen with Fred to ask a question. Anybody else here, while we're waiting for hands to be raised, have anything that was brought up during Fred's presentation today that you want to dive a little deeper into or have comments about or questions or something that hit you as especially relevant?
I thought that was a lot of fun. Thank you for reminding me why I do this. Because there's a lot of pleasure and pain in writing.
Well, I'll ask the audience, are they walking away with information and introspective and motivation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
We've got Ed Frank here wanting to come on and ask a question or make a comment.
Sure. Yep.
We'll give him just a second to come on there.
Ed's got a slow internet connection.
Remaster again. Yeah.
Here we go.
There you are,
Hey
Ed.
there. Hey.
Hey, Fred. Everyone else. I liked your presentation, and it just struck me as different and something I could appreciate because you went through all these different statistics and graphs and science, and you researched all these studies on the effects of writing on your health. Is this typically your approach when you go to write something? Do you do a lot of research like this first, or do you just sit down and write?
Good question, Ed. I do. Different people have different process. When I do workshops or I'm presenting content that's factual, I do a fair amount of research on it. I always update my research because I'm a technology guy. I always have to update my technology because it changes so fast. When I'm writing fiction, I'm the kind of person that has to think about it ahead of time. I can't sit down and write, but I might be trying some of the exercises Christina says. But I find that many times when I sit on the tractor for 2 or 3 hours cutting grass, I'll come up with a plot for a story and a couple character ideas, and then I'll go back and jot them down on paper. When I'm doing force writing, I just sit down and write. I just start, writing, but I don't do that often. So normally I'm the kind of person that thinks about things ahead of time. So if I'm doing factual material, I have to go do my research to make sure I get it right. So, that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
Good question, Ed. Thank you.
Hey, by the way, Ed, you won the prize. He got the most right answers, I think. We'll go back and check that, but I think he got the most right answers on matching up authors.
What does he win?
Satisfaction.
I didn't say it because 5 other people had already said it. They were jumping in to get in there first, but
right. I did not share the information on this presentation.
Okay, we can share that.
Yeah, let's do that. One more thing I want to do before we leave is I want to share one page at the end of my presentation that's a pointer to all my sources. And this presentation will be made available. Jess and Sarah and I will put it up somewhere on the website.
Yes, and I'd love to have a blog about this.
And she's trying to talk me into doing a blog here.
Yeah. So while you're bringing that up, I just wanted to share some more comments that came about that. One question was, switching between, there we go. Do you find the reasons that you write are also your motivations to write / solutions to writer's block? So do you find that your reasons flow into keeping you writing, or that's where things break away?
I don't. Yeah, right. I have to deal with writer's block differently than I deal with the reasons for writing. I don't experience a lot of writer's block because I think about it first and then I write. If I were writing why I think, I might encounter it more. But I think actually I've got some notes from Christina's presentation I might try. I think there's some very good.
What the science says is that there's no such thing as writer's block.
Oh.
Right. I've read that. I've read that.
We've all said it. I know. I'm just so blocked. I have writer's block. Yeah. But in reality, you're not blocked from writing. It's that you just need to do some other type of writing. You need to do something else and come back to whatever it is you're working on. Sometimes you just have a bad idea.
Yeah, my biggest.
It's true. Like you start on, you're like, I can't work on this. I can't work on it because it sucks. You got to try something else.
I don't think a lot of people at Airmeet or the people in this room have my problem. I have a writer's block when I know there's a word out there that I've heard before that fits, and I can't come close to remembering it. And if I remember it, and my wife's not home, I can't get close enough to spell it, to get Google to bring it up. So, I get frustrated and I get stopped on that. So I have to somehow learn the technique of letting it go by and be read on the screen because it's not the right word. And sometimes it's gobbledygook and I have to go back later and fix it. But it's so I guess.
You should try Siri.
Oh, I've done dictation and the other problem
Siri,
I can't pronounce words correctly either. So and I have a serious case of dyslexia too. So my sentence, so I do a fair amount of, that's my struggles in writing. So, but it's not because I having trouble getting the idea down. I'm having trouble getting it to say the way I want.
The mechanics.
The mechanics of it, yeah. So anyhow.
Yeah,
All right, so this is a sheet of references, and this will be on the website. And so these are all clickable links. There's websites on the left and some books I've read on the right. The one that I'll point out is Mark Edmondson wrote a book, Why Write, was very, very well written, by the way. He's a good writer. A little bit too flowery for my benefit, but he had a lot of good content in that book. So there's these resources are used to put this content together. So that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Fred, for sharing all that. That was very informative.
Does anybody else have any questions? We're done, right?
Yeah, I think that was the question.
Thank you for
having me. There's a couple thank yous.
Thank you,
well
Jess.
Done.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
So, thank you again so much to Christina and Fred for coming in today and sharing their well-researched, well-thought-out, very engaging presentations. But the workshop is not over for those of you who are on Airmeet. So those of you who are streaming in from YouTube or Facebook, we're done for the streaming portion of our workshop today. But we encourage you to continue the conversations on those platforms and with other writers and readers and collaborators in your life. For those who are on Airmeet, what we're going to do is move you to the table. So the great thing about this platform is that we can switch from presentation mode to a more roundtable mode, where you will be able to see everybody who is plugged in on Airmeet today, hear from them, talk to them, and then Patricia Thrushhart, we're so grateful, she will lead the conversation for peer reviews.
So enough to be on one table.
Yes, and we'll all be on one table. So for those of you who brought work that you would like to share, or perhaps you have a little something that you're considering sharing, or if you just want to be a great listener and beta reader for some wonderful writers, this is your opportunity to connect on those things that you brought today. And so Patricia will get you reoriented, but the main rule that I want to enforce as my middle school English teacher, inner teacher comes out, is don't apologize for your work before you read it. This is the number one thing that I learned when I was going to poetry readings in Harrisburg, and people would come in and read their own work. And the one rule that was fiercely acknowledged and reiterated each time was, don't apologize for your work. And that can come in all different kind of ways where you're kind of hedging, like, well, this isn't very good, but, or, you know, I'm not a really good writer, but, or whatever. Don't do that to yourself. What you can do is say, I'm looking for feedback on this, but we don't want you to handicap yourself before you even have a chance to debut your work to your audience. So
good word.
That's the main thing, and we're so glad that you guys could tune in. Those of you on Airmeet, we're going to move you to the tables, and everyone else, thank you so much. We've got a lot of great events coming up. Next week on Sunday is Joe Taylor, an author of I'm Just Lucky to Own My Own Car, which is a wonderful book, and we're so glad he'll be in here. We're so glad that he's coming in. He's always a hoot to talk to. Oh, I'm using the wrong word. That's Byron Hoot's word. Okay, so anyway, next week at 2 o'clock, Joe Taylor. Don't miss out on that. And tomorrow is the last day for spring submissions to the Watershed Journal, so get those submissions in.
And we are open for long-form submissions as well.
Yes, and our call for manuscripts is currently open for our cooperative publishing. So if you have a book, and I know many of you do, send them to the Watershed Journal at Gmail.